This is the first video in a series that I'll be doing about online privacy and how you can protect yours. We're starting with the basics today. What are cookies? Cookies are not a complicated topic, but nerd alert, I'm gonna be deep diving today. This video is gonna cover everything you never wanted to know about what cookies are, how they can be used to track you, why not all cookies are bad, and what you can do to take control of cookies on your devices so that the power's in your hands instead of those who want to profit from you. I'm a software engineer with over 2 decades experience in tech. But even though I make tech for a living, lately I'm finding myself wanting to use less and less of it. From big tech censorship to a social media mental health crisis to the complete loss of privacy, I've had enough. So I call myself TechPhobe here on YouTube, where I call out issues with my industry and I share tips on how you can protect yourself. So hit like, hit subscribe, and turn on your notifications because I wouldn't want you to miss a video. TLDR, a cookie is basically just a way for a website to remember something about you. Way before social media existed, the World Wide Web was created by researchers as a way to share documents with one another across long distances. These documents became known as web pages. Now, the key word here is document. Web pages are not an application or a computer program. In other words, the document itself is just data. So these early web pages, they were designed to be fetched from a web server by your web browser, and they use something called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP for short, to talk to each other. Basically, your browser hits up a web server and says, hey, give me document X, and if the web server has that document, it hands it over, and then the connection's terminated. Now, as the web was becoming more and more popular, and tech nerds and companies started to push the boundaries of what you could do with a web page, the desire for personalized and dynamic content became a thing. The most basic problem to be solved was, if a web server presents you with a login form, how does it remember that you logged in? A cookie is a really simple piece of data that can contain almost any arbitrary information at all, and it looks something like this. This cookie asks your browser to remember that type is chocolate chip and baked on is Saturday, November 20th, 2021 at 10:18 a.m. Now, in the real world, instead of storing useless information like in my stupid example, a cookie might store a session ID, for example, that can be used to reference your user profile in the website's database. Here's how a simple login might work. You've got a user profile that has, as a bare minimum, an ID number, a username or email address, and a password. Now, when you log in with the correct username and password, the website creates a session. And that session has information like your user ID, when it was created, the last time you accessed or used this session, and when it expires. Now the website gives your web browser a cookie to store that has the session ID and possibly an expiry date, so your browser can delete the cookie when it's expired. So the next time you visit this website, your browser, when it's fetching a page, it also hands over this cookie, and the server will then look for that session in its database, and that contains your user ID. So then your user profile's pulled up, and that's how you see your account landing page instead of someone else's. Cookies can also be used to remember things like what's in your shopping cart, or even just the fact that you've ever been at that page before. So as you can see, the very purpose of the cookie in the first place is to recognize and identify something about you. In my video, How Big Tech Tracks You, I talked about a tool that Google makes called Google Analytics. This is a tool that millions of websites use in order to gather information about their visitors so that they can make better decisions about how to run their sites. And in that video, I mentioned that I don't really have a problem with small mom and pop websites gathering their own analytics data to help them make it as a small business. The problem is that Google Analytics is owned by a giant privacy-destroying behemoth like Google, and they're the ones gathering this information on behalf of the websites that use it. And Google Analytics does this with a cookie. When you visit a site that uses an analytics tool, that tool gives your web browser a cookie so that the next time you come in contact with that same tool, it remembers you. And that way, analytics can be discovered about things like how frequently people return to a web page. And so, of course, if we're talking about a very widely used tool like Google Analytics, or even various advertising networks or social media companies that let you embed things like tweets or sign in with their accounts, well, those cookies can then be used to track you across websites. And so this allows companies to know many, if not all, of the various websites that you frequent. So what can and should you do about this? It is possible to disable cookies altogether in your web browser, but if you do this, then any site that requires you to log into it is just going to stop working. So that's not a good option for pretty much everyone. You can use incognito mode, with the caveat that your incognito session will continue to store and volunteer any cookies that are transferred during that session. So here's what I recommend. If you're using Chrome, your very first step should be to install an ad blocker like uBlock Origin. This is going to block a lot of the ad networks as well as analytics tools like Google Analytics. But I also recommend you install something called Privacy Badger. This is an extension developed by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and its goal is: Privacy Badger was born out of our desire to be able to recommend a single extension that would automatically analyze and block any tracker or ad that violated the principle of user consent, which could function well without any settings, knowledge, or configuration by the user, which is produced by an organization that is unambiguously working for its users rather than for advertisers. Those two extensions will block the vast majority of tracking cookies, as well as annoying ads that make the internet absolutely intolerable. Now go into Settings, click on Privacy and Security, and then click Cookies and Other Site Data. Make sure that Block Third-Party Cookies is enabled. This will prevent a site from setting a cookie that can be used and read by another site. Next, you might want to consider turning on Clear Cookies and Site Data when you close all windows. If you do this, then the downside is that the next time you open Chrome, you'll have to re-log in to whatever sites you use. So think carefully about whether this is the right thing for you before you do this. But the benefit of turning this on is that if any tracking cookies slipped past uBlock Origin or Privacy Badger, they'll be nuked automatically the next time you close Chrome. Now there's one big problem I haven't addressed yet. Unfortunately, you can't install extensions for Chrome on mobile devices. So there's no ad blockers, there's no Privacy Badger, and Chrome is made by Google, which is one of the worst privacy-destroying companies that exist. So I recommend switching to Brave, which has a really good mobile version, and it has an ad blocker pre-installed. Now, Brave has had a few controversies, and I recommend that you read up on them to make sure that they're not deal breakers for you. But as a privacy protecting browser, it seems to do very well. And let's be honest, anything is better than Chrome, especially on a cell phone where even more about you can be tracked, like location data. There's an online tool made by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the same organization that makes Privacy Badger, called Cover Your Tracks. You can use this tool to test how much can be learned about you via your browser, and Brave scores very high, and that's the reason that I recommend it. Brave also has some extra privacy protecting features that I really like, such as being able to block login buttons as well as embedded tweets and posts from social media sites. If you do go ahead and switch to Brave, I still recommend that you go into the cookie settings just like you would in Chrome and make sure that blocking third-party cookies is enabled, and consider turning on Delete All Cookies on shutdown. You might also still want to consider installing Privacy Badger too, just for extra protection against any tracking cookies that slipped past Brave's built-in ad blocker. You don't need uBlock Origin on Brave though, since it has its own ad blocker built in. So that about wraps it up for cookies. I hope that you came out of this with a better understanding of what cookies are, how they can be used to track you, and what steps you can take to limit their tracking abilities. In future videos, we're going to go over lots of other ways that you can protect your online privacy without sacrificing convenience. So thanks for watching. If you liked this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. Please share it with anyone who might be interested and who could benefit from this. Subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you next time.